Brittney Griner stood on the podium in Paris, gold medal around her neck, Team USA jersey on, anthem playing, and for a moment it looked like she was still firmly part of the program's future. That is why this latest roster shift has hit so many people the way it has. Because when the Team USA group for the next FIBA World Cup cycle came out, Griner's name was simply not there. No dramatic send-off, no big public explanation, no detailed statement about injury, retirement, or role. She was just gone from the list, and that silence immediately became the story. That is what makes this feel bigger than a normal roster update. If a player had clearly retired, people would understand. If there had been an injury issue, the explanation would be easy. If Team USA had openly said it was turning fully toward a younger generation, that would at least give fans a clear direction. But when a player helps win Olympic gold and then disappears from the next major roster without much public context, people are going to ask questions. And once those questions start, they rarely stay small. The bigger picture here is that Team USA does not look like the same program it did in Paris. That Olympic team leaned heavily on veteran experience. It was built to win immediately, and it did exactly that. Players like Diana Taurasi, Chelsea Gray, Jewel Lloyd, Alyssa Thomas, Breanna Stewart, and Brittney Griner represented a version of USA basketball that trusted championship maturity, history in the program, and the comfort that comes from having players who have lived through those pressure moments before. That formula delivered another gold medal. So nobody can say it failed. But the roster that followed told a very different story. Suddenly, the energy around Team USA looked younger, fresher, more marketable, and more aligned with where the women's game is heading right now. Caitlin Clark was there. Paige Buchers was there. Angel Reese was there. Those are not just talented players. Those are giant names. They bring audiences with them. They bring attention, cameras, social media traction, and a different kind of cultural momentum. So once Griner was left off while that group moved in, it stopped feeling like a routine basketball decision and started looking like a very clear signal about what USA basketball wants to become over the next several years. That is really where the conversation begins. Because once you step back from the emotion of Griner's omission, the direction becomes easier to read. This program looks like it is shifting away from the last veteran-heavy era and toward the next phase of the sport. And whether fans like that or not, it is not hard to understand the logic. Women's basketball is in a different place now. The audience is larger, the spotlight is brighter, and certain players are driving attention on a level the sport has not seen in a long time. USA basketball knows that. It would be naive to think they are not aware of the value of putting Clark, Buchers, Reese, and other younger stars front and center. At the same time, that still does not fully answer the Griner question, because a generational transition usually comes with some kind of explanation, especially when the player being left off was part of a gold medal team not long ago. That is why the silence around her absence feels so deliberate. It almost invites people to speculate. And once the silence lasts long enough, people start assuming the answer must be more complicated than simple basketball fit. That is exactly what happened here. Online discussion around Griner's omission moved fast, and it moved in a lot of different directions. Some fans treated it like a pure basketball decision and said Team USA was simply turning the page. Others said it reflected a branding decision, one that prioritized the most visible stars in the women's game right now. And then, as always happens in the social media era, the discussion got uglier and more personal than it should have. Rumors, disputed clips, lip-reading debates, and all kinds of unverified claims started circulating. That kind of noise tends to fill the vacuum when organizations choose not to explain themselves. What matters in a serious reading of the situation is not the wildest thing said online. It is the fact that Team USA appears to have made a clean break without wanting to publicly drag the reasoning into the spotlight. That is a choice. And usually when an organization with this much media experience chooses silence, it is because it believes saying less creates less damage than saying more. That does not necessarily mean something explosive happened behind the scenes. But it does suggest they did not want the public conversation centered on the real mechanics of the decision. And that brings us back to what may be the simplest explanation of all. Team USA may have decided that this was the moment to build around the next era, and that doing so required a decisive separation from part of the old one. If that is the case, Then Griner became one of the clearest examples of what that transition looks like. Not because her accomplishments disappeared, and not because her value to past teams was suddenly erased, but because international programs are always balancing two timelines at once. One timeline is about rewarding what players have done. The other is about choosing who you want carrying the program into the next major cycle. Those timelines are not always kind to veterans, even great ones. What makes this more emotionally charged is that Griner is not just any veteran. She is one of the most recognizable players of her generation. Her presence, size, defensive impact, and experience have mattered to Team USA for years. So when someone like that is absent, it feels symbolic. It feels like more than a lineup change. It feels like the program quietly closing a chapter. Meanwhile, the chapter opening in front of everyone is impossible to miss. Caitlin Clark is not just back in the national team picture. She looks like one of the central pillars of where the whole thing is headed. That is a dramatic change from the last Olympic cycle, when her omission became one of the loudest debates in women's basketball. At that time, fans were furious, and plenty of people felt Team USA had missed a major opportunity, not just competitively, but culturally. Looking at where things stand now, it feels like USA basketball saw the wave coming and is fully committed to riding it this time. And Clark's presence changes everything. It changes the crowd. It changes the media attention. It changes the entire temperature around the team. That is not disrespectful to anyone else on the roster. It is just reality. When Clark is involved, the event gets bigger. More people care. More people watch. More people talk. Add Paige Buchers and Angel Reese to that mix, and suddenly Team USA does not just look like a powerhouse. It looks like a modern showcase of the players driving the women's game into its next phase. That is part why Griner's omission feels so tied to something larger than her individual situation. It is not just that she was left off. It is who is being elevated at the same time. This is not random. This is not a quiet roster built around overlooked grinders. This is a major shift toward the most visible young names in sport. That makes the message impossible to miss, even if USA basketball has chosen not to say it directly. Now layer in Clark's own situation, and the whole thing becomes even more interesting. She is coming into the stage after a long stretch away from competitive play, after injury frustration, after questions about rhythm, and after months of anticipation over what her return would look like. And instead of easing back into the picture quietly, she returns as one of the faces of the program. That is a huge statement from Team USA. It says they are not just interested in Clark as a future piece. They are ready to put her front and center now. That matters because Clark does not enter this environment from a position of perfect momentum. She is not coming off a smooth, uninterrupted season where everything lined up cleanly. She had to work her way back physically and mentally. She admitted that the injury cycle messed with her mind, which is a very honest thing for a player of her stature to say. But what has made people feel so optimistic is that she also sounds like someone who believes she is not just healthy again, but stronger and sharper than she was before everything went sideways. That is why so many fans are excited about what this Team USA group could become. It is not just about star power. It is about fit. Clark's passing range, deep shooting, and pace change the geometry of the game. Buchers brings a calm, polished versatility that travels anywhere. Reese brings energy, rebounding, presence, and her own massive following. Those pieces are different, but together they represent exactly the kind of modern core that a long-term national program will want to build around. And make no mistake, this is long-term thinking. Carl Lawson is not coaching like someone focused on one isolated event. This feels like a foundation being laid for the World Cup cycle and beyond. It feels like an early version of what Team USA wants to look like moving toward Los Angeles and the next major chapter of international competition. That is what makes the Griner decision stand out even more. It does not feel temporary. It feels directional. That is also why this moment feels so important for Clark personally. There was a time when her connection to Team USA at the senior level felt like a debate. Now it feels like an inevitability. She did not spend the last year publicly demanding anything. She did not campaign. She did not turn every omission into a public fight. She kept working, kept preparing, And now she is stepping into a version of the program that appears ready to revolve around her generation. That is a huge shift, and it tells you how completely the landscape has changed. For Griner, though, that shift lands in a much harsher way. Because when institutions move on, they rarely do it with the same emotion fans bring to the conversation. Programs do not always honor transitions in a way people consider graceful. Sometimes they simply make the decision internally and let the roster speak for itself. That appears to be what happened here. Griner was part of a winning Olympic team, but when the next version of Team USA was assembled, she no longer fit the direction the program wanted to emphasize publicly. That does not erase what she accomplished. It does not mean she was not valuable. It does not even necessarily mean she could not still help in certain situations. What it means is that USA basketball appears to have decided the future it wants to sell, build, and invest in looks different now. And once that decision was made, silence may have been the easiest way to avoid turning the transition into a headline war. Still, the silence has had its own consequence. It turned a basketball decision into a mystery. It let speculation do the talking. It let fans draw their own conclusions. And once that happens, everyone reads the omission through whatever lens they already have, whether that is competitive logic, media logic, generational politics, or personal controversy. That is the cost of choosing not to explain yourself. In the end, though, the biggest takeaway is pretty clear. Team USA is moving into a new era, and it is not being subtle about who that era belongs to. Caitlin Clark is central to it. Paige Buchers is central to it. Angel Reese is central to it. The program is getting younger, louder, more visible, and more aligned with the current energy of women's basketball. Brittney Griner being left off the roster is not the whole story, but maybe the clearest sign yet that the old version of Team USA is being packed away. That is why this is more than just one player missing from one roster. It is a turning point. It is a handoff from one generation to another, whether everyone involved wanted it to happen this way or not. And if you are watching women's basketball right now, that is the real story. The gold medal era that just won in Paris is already being pushed into the background,